Welcome to the SBIDER Careers Podcast
with Laura Guzman
and Ed Hill.
We are discussing the career trajectories of SBIDER researchers and also those who carry out important work that enables and supports the research being conducted.
It is great to be joined today by Samick Datta, who was a postdoctoral researcher here between 2011 to 2017, and he's now a population modeller at NIWA, the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research in Wellington, New Zealand.
Join us for this episode as we discuss the transition from academic roles to leadership positions in non-academic scientific organizations.
Welcome, Samick. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Can you tell us the story of how you became interested in mathematical biology?
I guess so I was always quite environmentally focused, I think, even just growing up. And actually, I think animals was more my passion. I really wanted to be a vet when I was growing up. And so that's, in my final year of school, that's actually what I applied for. And so, in the UK at that time, I think you had six choices you could make for universities. But if you're applying for veterinary, you could only actually apply to 4 out of those 6. So there are only 6 places in the UK that did veterinary medicine back then. I don't know if it's increased now. So I applied to 4 places and basically just didn't get in. I think my grades were okay, but you generally need a lot of work experience for going into veterinary medicine, and I had some on the kind of smaller animal side, but the foot and mouth outbreak, which was around 2001, that kind of killed off a couple of farm placements I had. So that's a very long-winded way of saying I didn't get into veterinary medicine. But at that point, I kind of had a bit of a rethink as to what I could do, and if I was just kind of going to keep trying to forge ahead with veterinary, or maybe sidestep to something similar. And at the time, I did kind of maths was one of my strongest subjects at school, so I kind of started looking into careers that were, still focused around animals and the environment, but perhaps had more of a quantitative focus. And so from there, I decided to kind of go a bit more of a theoretical route. And so I went to Durham University for my undergrads. This is 2003 to 7, and I did a course. It's called Natural Sciences there, which is basically just an overarching name for all the sciences, and then you kind of picked the specific sciences you want to do within that. So I did mostly maths and some chemistry there, and had a few modules around mathematical biology, which I really, really found interesting. And so I still kind of wanted to work in kind of environmental science and using mathematics in some way. So I was looking for those kinds of jobs after I graduated, basically over the summer of 2007. And towards the end of that, I still didn't find I was getting interviews for the kind of roles that I wanted. So I did a bit more of a rethink and thought that perhaps having a funded PhD I'd see as kind of a slightly less well-paid job, but would put me in better stead in the long term to get into that kind of work. And so that's exactly what happened. So I ended up doing my PhD in mathematical biology at the University of York, basically from 2008 to 11, and then my first role that I got out of that was at the University of Warwick with Matt Kaling, who I was working with for about 5.5 years.
That highlights from that adversity spawns opportunity from that kind of initial university applications to then the course you ultimately took.
Yeah, I'd say things certainly seem to have a way for working out. I mean, I don't know any of my friends who aren't kind of happy where they are, and quite a lot of those that was where they've ended up was not the plan 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and kind of these twists and turns that happen that are often out of your control. They still seem to land you in a very good place, from what I can tell.
Absolutely. From having that progression, so then from undergraduate studies to then like PhD and then postdoctoral role, and then you took this position at NIWA. What was your feeling in terms of then pursuing roles outside of academia?
Yeah, it was definitely kind of a fairly big decision. I think when you're in the PhD and postdoc environment, just as with a lot of jobs, you consider your career by what you're surrounded by, and what you're surrounded by are very smart people, a lot of whom are lecturers and professors and the like. And so I did apply for lecturer roles while I was doing my postdoc, and I found them quite competitive. They're often, compared to the number of postdocs, the number of roles out there it seems alarmingly small, and so I kind of knew it would be an uphill struggle from that time. But yeah, I think after working, I was into my second postdoc with Matt, and I was, to be fair, the role at NIWA that I ended up getting, I just found completely by chance. I was over in Hong Kong visiting a friend of mine, and Hong Kong was a really cool place, and so I decided to just have a look and see if there were. At the time, I just thought, I'll see if there's epidemiology roles over here, and just while there, I just stumbled upon this role at NIWA, and so NIWA was a place that I know you already said it, but yeah, it's National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research, so people there do work related to things like climate change, carbon, things to do with fishing, weather. It's a fairly environmentally driven focus, and it was a place I knew about from my PhD days. My one of my supervisors, Richard Law, I think he made me aware of this place in New Zealand that did kind of interesting marine-based research, and my PhD had been on marine ecosystems. So I kind of had it on my radar, and actually, when I finished my PhD, the role at Warwick and the role at NIWA, there was a postdoc going there at the time. Those are the two first applications I made, and had interviews for both jobs, and then the Warwick role was the one I ended up getting. So it seemed quite fitting that, finding a permanent role there a few years later on was kind of quite lucky. So I just, really thought it seemed like a cool opportunity. I wasn't ready to leave science, but I was kind of more open to looking at a role that wasn't, purely just at a university. And so it seemed quite a appropriate middle ground to take. I had kind of colleagues who I knew in New Zealand who kind of spoke quite highly of it. So I kind of applied without thinking much of it, and then things just kind of snowballed very quickly. I had an interview, and then I got offered the job, and then I suddenly I hadn't actually really thought of, okay, am I prepared to leave the UK and move halfway across the world? And so, I definitely had to ask them for a few days for me to really think about it. And ultimately decided that, I was really strongly considering actually staying at Warwick, because I loved my job here. There's absolutely nothing I didn't like. But at the end of the day, I think I felt that I might regret it if I didn't take it, but I don't think I'd regret it if I did, even if I ended up leaving a few years later and coming home, say. But it's been just over 5 years since I moved over there, and it's still going very well. Still really enjoying it there.
It's great that you have experience now then in postdoctoral studies and also in this new position. So, in your view, what have been the similarities and differences in your tasks and responsibilities between your postdoctoral role in the non-academic setting of NIWA?
Yeah, it's a good question, and certainly something I was worried about when I started NIWA. I didn't know if I'd be somewhat underprepared. So doing a postdoc is a really great way to start a scientific career, I think, because you get the time and resources to really just focus on one problem and really get your head down and get a good understanding of things. And it's actually a rare opportunity, because in most other fields you don't get that luxury of kind of just being able to have your little niche, your little forte, and just really kind of beaver away at that. So I'd say in terms of similarities, the science, I think probably the best way to start is actually kind of explain how NIWA works and how it's actually different to doing something like a postdoc at university. So as I just said, a postdoc, generally your PI, a professor or whomever, has gotten funding for a project that is, tackling a specific problem. They need someone to work on that full time, and that's where a postdoc comes in to kind of really head up that role and drive that research forwards. NIWA, on the other hand, it's what's called a Crown Research Institute in New Zealand. So there are, I don't know how many of them, maybe 8 or 9 in the country, and they were set up by the government, but then they essentially operate independently. So they have some government funding which they are able to use to do their own research. So imagine just pots of internal university funding that SBIDER SBIDER has, say, 3 postdocs worth of money that they can use to focus on whatever research they want. We have a kind of equivalent of that, some money where there are different, kind of in the way there are departments at Warwick Uni, there's different centres within NIWA that are focused on oceans or the coasts or estuaries and things like that, and climate. And so some of the work is you can, if you've got an idea for a project, you can apply for that and you could get some internal funding to do that. Most of the work NIWA does is actually commercial work. So like how universities put in big applications to places like EPSRC, MRC, we can bid for work either based on research ideas that we ourselves have, or also when different government departments put out tenders for work they want done. So, for example, my group's called the Population Modelling Group. It was called Fisheries Modelling when I started, and then we kind of had a bit of a rebrand. But a lot of the core work that people in my group do is related to fisheries. So things to do with stock assessments for different species and work associated with that. So trying to get a handle on how different species are faring in terms of their population abundance and what impacts fishing is having on them. And so the New Zealand government, there's a department called the Ministry for Primary Industries, who their kind of remit includes all the fisheries. And so each year they will throw out, lots and lots of these tenders, and NIWA, along with other providers who are able to do the work, they will write tenders saying, we will do this work. We believe it will cost us this much. These are the results we'll give you. And then MPI looks at those and they decide who they're going to go with. So a lot of our work is a bit more responsive in that way. So instead of just coming up with your own research ideas, there's commercial work that's needing doing, and you apply for that. And so what it ends up being is you have, instead of just focusing on one thing, which is what I was very, very used to in a postdoc, you could end up with 4 projects, 7 projects, 10 projects for the year. And you have different amounts of time that you have to work on those different projects. And those all have individual deadlines. So what that means is you end up, you kind of feel like almost like an independent consultant, in that you're looked after by an organization and you have your salary with them, but you get to manage your own time quite a lot. So it's up to you whether or not you take on specific bits of work. No one comes and says to you, here's your workload for the year. It's quite kind of self-driven, and you're given support, especially at the start of your career, because obviously, especially if you come from abroad, you have no idea what's going on. But once you've been there kind of a few years, you get a bit more of a handle on how things work, and you have quite a large amount of autonomy in saying yes or no to bits of work you like. And in that way, you're able to carve out your own niche, doing the kind of work that you find interesting, hopefully. Like often, you might have to do some work that's kind of rote and you do it every year, and it might take up a week or 2 of your time, but once you've done it a few times, it becomes very, very easy to do because you're very familiar with what the data is going to look like. And it's just, just additional rows of data for the year that's just gone, for example. It's a place where everyone kind of carves out their own niche doing the kind of work that they want with luck. And there's a lot of self-direction in terms of, for example, if 2 projects have very, very similar deadlines, you might find that even though you've got the time over the year, because the work is constricted to certain parts of the year, you might not be able to take on that second project because you know that those deadlines are going to clash and you're not going to be able to get both bits of work done. So there's a lot of self-direction there, which is certainly one of the things I found difficult to adjust to when I started, because as a postdoc, you're working on one project, so you're never going to have overlapping deadlines. Whereas, if you're working on 10, chances are you will.
That's interesting to hear about the kind of those funding mechanisms. So there seems to be parallels there, kind of at the upper level of going out applying for funding. Ultimately, that can then be kind of apportioned to different people. And you might have touched upon there, so from getting the academic roles into the role you now have at NIWA, was there a single hardest challenge that you felt you've had to overcome?
Yeah, I'd say probably out of all the challenges I've had, I think it was just adjusting to the kind of the way that NIWA worked, and the fact that it's kind of a double-edged sword in the sense that you're given, at least this is my experience. I don't know if everyone who works there would say this, but yeah, for me, I felt that I was given a lot of autonomy. When I arrived there, I literally thought, in the same way I'd been my postdoc, I'd be thinking, okay, they've hired me because there's work that needs doing, so that will land on my desk, and then that's what I'll have to do. But it was quite, there was some work lined up for me, so they had to essentially to have a role that they advertise for at NIWA, they have to show, okay, they have a certain amount of work that needs doing, and the current staff who are there are too busy to do it. So there's basically an overflow of work, and we need someone additional to take on that role. So some work was there for me, but the rest, I was assisted by people who are more senior, so people who are equivalent to professors here. They're called chief scientists and program leaders there at NIWA, and they're the people who are very established and have gone out and gotten bigger pieces of work, and then they're obviously not able to do it all, and hence the work kind of trickles down to people who have the skills and are able to take it on. So I'd say for me, I think the thing that it probably took me, over a year to adjust to, was really knowing where the work was going to be coming from, and making sure I was prepared for that. And it's, the longer I've spent there, the easier that's become. And you kind of go from someone who kind of doesn't have a great idea of how the organization works and is assisted quite a lot, to the point now where I'm able to apply for projects myself and take them on. And so you get more and more agency the longer you're there. And you certainly start to feel a bit more independent. And so it's an interesting organization. I think it's at its best, it's when it's supporting people in those early periods until they're able to basically stand on their own 2 feet, and then you're supporting the people who are coming in after you, and that's kind of so you're always kind of helping those who are newer to the organization, basically. And I find that works quite well.
Has there been a skill set that you have developed that maybe you didn't think you needed it?
I'd say compared to probably 2 things. One, which I've touched upon, is certainly timekeeping. So just really knowing, months ahead that this piece of work there's a meeting in February where you'll be presenting that piece of work, and it's October now, but you only have a month's worth of time, say, to get that piece of work done. Just knowing when to fit that piece of work in and around all your other projects. So I think just dealing with multiple projects with different deadlines, I think it's been quite, it was kind of a bit of a steep learning curve, but I feel I've come out of the other side of that now. And that was, that was something that I kind of took for granted, that when you're doing a postdoc, it's just lovely because, you're always working towards your next deadline, which might not be to the end of the project, or it might be a year from now, but that you've got that kind of singular focus. Whereas, when you have multiple things going on at one time, just kind of, being organized, but also, I don't know about other people, but for me, I find it, if I've got 2 things to focus on, rather than focus on one thing for 3 days and then the other thing for 2 days, I'll try and kind of do both at the same time, and I won't get either of them done, and I'll be much slower for both. So just trying to kind of compartmentalize your time a bit is something that I was terrible at when I started NIWA, I think, and then got much more efficient at it as time went on. So the other skill set, I'd say, is just realizing that, particularly with maths and modeling, I found there's the work that you're used to doing, and then you could find yourself doing something similar related. Someone will say to you, "Oh, you've not done this kind of modeling before, but this project, we need someone to do it. Here's the code we used last time. Can you get up to speed and see if you can help us out?" And 9 times out of 10, you can. It's not, you hear new words and new types of modeling, and it's obviously very daunting, and you imagine, no, that's not what I trained as, so I can't do that. But actually, you find within NIWA, within organizations like NIWA, the work needs doing. You're the closest thing to, what the person who last did it, you're the closest thing to what they were doing. Just get on with it and have a bash. And so just kind of being a bit willing to step outside your comfort zone and learn new skills to help out. And you find that often organically leads you to new avenues of work that, a year ago you had no idea about, but suddenly you kind of feel well placed enough. So just, being willing to kind of take those steps and, help out with work that you don't feel you're ideally qualified for, but really you often learn on the job better than you would by just learning things in theory. So it's been good for that, I'd say.
So upon reflection, it's like realizing actually you have these like core skills and how translatable they are to what might seem very different problems. But as you say, there might be actual similarities there where then you can use the learnings you've had from the past and kind of apply yourself and help dive into that.
Yeah, precisely that, I'd say. Yeah, I think you maybe at least working at NIWA with a lot of people who are not modelers, they're kind of held in this weird reverence where I mean, it applies exactly the same to these other people who, they consider themselves, say, a marine ecologist, and they're great at, they've done all this work with the data and, their ecology skills are amazing, but they think they can't do the modeling, and then actually they show you what they've done, and you say, oh, you actually have done everything here. Like I'd say with a lot of fields, there's a lot less of a kind of gulf between them than people think, and particularly, if you're in the mathematical modeling field, I think, there's often a lot of transferable skills, and you're quite often not as far away from all these different fields as you think you are.
And lastly, what would be one piece of advice that you would give to listeners who are interested in, say, mathematical biology and mathematical modeling?
Yeah, if I was going to give one piece of advice, I think probably just to, related to what we were just saying, I'd say just don't try and pigeonhole yourself. So it's not so much about the work you're doing, but don't feel that you are, that your borders are set up by what your PhD was about, or your borders are set up by what your first postdoc is about. You can always learn new skills, and if something's interesting to you, I would kind of go with your best foot forward and just be confident and accept that you might not know what you're doing at first, but just realize that if you've come through a PhD or you're in a postdoc, or even if you've not started a PhD, that you can learn skills with the right kind of support behind you. You can learn skills quite quickly and really contribute to a larger number of fields than you probably think you can. So for me, my whole PhD, I'd never fit it to any data whatsoever. And when I started my postdoc with Matt, looking at spreader infection in honeybees, I basically had, apart from the actual maths and coding skills, I had no idea what I was doing. And he just taught me through it, and some basic examples. It was a lot easier to pick up than I thought it would be, and that's certainly not a testament to my skill, which is probably lower than that of anyone who's going to be listening to this. But it just shows that if you're starting from a maths kind of background, I think it does seem to set you up well for getting your hands dirty in a number of fields. And I would just say, don't feel that you are ever too kind of restricted. There's actually a lot more options than you think there are a lot of the time.
Thank you, Samick, for joining us today. It's been very interesting to hear your perspective.
No worries. No, happy to have spoken to you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Cool. Great that you could join us, and all the best for the ongoing work with NIWA.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, same to you guys.